Ladies and gentlemen, angry Americans around the country and around the world, we have a very special guest who is a returning champion. One of our most popular guests in the first year and a half of this podcast, one of the most influential voices on national security, defense, and politics in America, and a guy with probably the most interesting Zoom layer that we've had on this show so far. Our friend, the great and powerful Malcolm Nance, is back on Angry Americans. How are you, sir?
Oh, it's good to be back. Man, I love Angry Americans, especially those darn t-shirts.
Aren't those great? They're so comfy.
It's not comfy, man. People stop me and they go, yeah, Angry American.
There's a lot of people who are wearing there's one that just says angry, and folks can get them at angryamericans.us. A lot of folks are wearing them to vote this year.
Ooh, sweet.
Yeah, and we have them in many colors. We also have to come up with a Navy, something Navy special, because you're also joining us on the week of the Navy birthday. So happy birthday to you and all of our other Navy friends.
Yeah, 245 years of military excellence.
So before we go into a lot of national security, politics, so many things I want to chop up with you, can you tell us, most folks are listening, some folks are watching. Can you tell us about the really cool room you're in back there? I see some camouflage. I see a flag. It's a pretty cool setup you got going on back there, man.
Yeah, well, this is the result of being stuck on ships, submarines, and, in the back of Humvees and other places where I was doing my collection for 25 going on 30 years. You get a lot of time with high quality magazines like Vanity Fair and Architectural Digest. And, all those, the beautiful thing about those magazines is they have like the little scented insert in there, So you're reading Vanity Fair and long form and reading those articles and seeing all this high-end stuff. And you think, I should have a room when I retire, not just a small I love me wall. I should have an I love me room. And so when I found it, and to my wife actually approved of this, right? The first thing she said was, well, I thought you were a chief. I thought you guys had your own space. And I was like, we do. It's called a goat locker. And I said, but this is going to be like my man cave. And I said, but I have all this stuff from all my missions. So I'm going to make it my man Skiff, which is sensitive compartmented information facility. So I don't have a man cave, I have a man Skiff and goat locker. And it literally says that on the door. So if you're not a Navy chief, you have to knock, uncover, enter, and state your business.
Is there a password required?
Yeah, it's good afternoon, senior chief. Uncover and state your business. So no, really, this is where I do a lot of my stuff that I've kept from operations. This flag I had in Afghanistan that's in the back, my armor, and things like that.
It's very cool. It looks like a Baghdad street sign behind you too. Is that what I see, or some kind of?
Yeah, somebody gave that to me as a gift when I came back from Iraq. It's a kilometer sign to Baghdad. And I thought that I was like, oh, that's the last time I'll see that place. And then I went back like over 10 years, like a couple of times a year. I even brought my wife over to assist us in operations. For a landscape architect, that was pretty impressive because she saw our anti-suicide bomb berms and she was like, this is all wrong. The angle will propel those trucks in the air into the middle of your compound. Who did this? You need a landscape architect. And because she's French Canadian.
Oh, you froze up on me there.
And I'm like, you're a landscape architect.
You froze up on me there for a second, Malcolm. I think we got you. Okay. But the Skiff is so secure that it probably doesn't give you an unencumbered connection. Maybe you have to make sure that the Russians and Trump and others are not listening to your conversations. When anybody thinks of Skiff, I always think about most recently Congressman Matt Gaetz, who went into the Skiff on Capitol Hill for that political stunt. I don't know if you remember that. It's supposed to be a place you don't bring your cell phones. It's supposed to be a secure environment where you talk about top secret and secret information. And a bunch of clowns decided to storm it for a photo op. But I don't think anybody's storming your Skiff, right?
Negative, Storm. This will not happen here. This is a pretty secure area of upstate New York. Let me just put it that way. I trained all the SWAT cops in the state police, the Homeland Security Division up here, and they all know who I am. I'm the terrorism god. So my neighbors do too. So it's pretty good up here.
So your neighborhood is safe. You're a good neighbor to have. I've been asking everybody, last time you joined us was episode 13. It was June of last year. We were in the car club. We had an awesome conversation. People loved it. We were on the brink of war with Iran. Now things have changed in many ways. But the question I've been asking everybody since the pandemic hit, as I usually ask them where you are, and you told us that, but how are you, man? How you been doing? How you been dealing with the pandemic? Give us a sense of what this has been like over the last 6-7 months since coronavirus hit for you, where you are.
Well, I'm fine. I haven't had coronavirus, so knock on wood, everything's been great. We're up here in the Upper Hudson Valley, so my house is rural. I mean, you go past the Walmart, boom, one block, it's farms and small hamlets, and I'm in a tiny little hamlet. And your listeners might not know that since that time when I was on your show, my wife passed away from ovarian cancer. And that's what I've been mainly spending this last year dealing with. It was last September 2019. And I have a new perspective on the world. Things are fleeting. And, they say that when you become, we call it the W word, right? A widower, which we all hate. You get projects. And in fact, Joe Biden is right when he said that, you've got to lean into the world. You have to want to help and improve the world, to be something, be part of something much bigger than yourself, and give your loved one the legacy they deserve. And I think that that's very important. And it's certainly been important for me.
Well, my heart's been with you. I know, so many of your fans and folks that follow your work have been thinking about you. As with everything in your life, you've approached it with tremendous courage and candor. And I know a lot of other folks have drawn strength from your journey, man. Your wife was an exceptional woman, so talented. Two of you were like a power couple, the likes of which I've never seen. Your story leading into this gives us a sense of it.
We were a power couple, and it was, when you know, and I spent 20 plus years in the military. My first thought was, I don't want to marry someone that likes my job. She hated my job, and then I came back and, we start dating, and then I go to Iraq for a year, and then I go, hey, why don't we move to the Middle East? You can get much better jobs. And she did. She had like awesome job, a $4 billion budget in the Middle East. And she was learning all these things that I had learned over the decades, and then watching them apply to like how she went to the grocery store, how my daughter and son were doing at the university, Paris Sorbonne over in Abu Dhabi, and then bringing her to Iraq. And she just jumped right into the spy game. I mean, she was just like, all right, this is fun. Everybody thinks you're armed Americans. I look like a Turkish lady because she would wear a hijab. And I was like, man, it's true. She just glides through the streets in places where I got to be upgunned. So it was great. And you know what? She's actually way more talented than I ever was. And so now this last year, certainly since the start of coronavirus, it's been very clear that my job is to fulfill her legacy. We have this giant house we've been renovating for 13 years, and it's not my house. This is Maryse Beliveau Nance's house, and there will be a historic marker about her life and her legacy living in this house. I'm a nobody in comparison.
Well, you're carrying her legacy forward well. You're keeping up the fight. You seem more focused than ever. I want to rip through the stuff that maybe we don't get to talk about enough when we're on television, right? And we always get like a 1 minute point at the end to say, by the way, let's talk about nukes, or by the way, let's talk about Russia, or let's talk about, how our national security is in danger. I want to kind of pull that apart with you in a way that only you can with me. For folks that maybe aren't thinking enough about national security, the country's at war with itself right now. In my view, it's a lot like, the Civil War. We're going to have this fight for the internal soul of the country, and then we're going to have potentially decades of rebuilding afterward. But there's still a really dynamic national security environment unfolding around us. And I want to rip through a couple of those and let you rip through them in a way that really only you can. And let me start by asking you, Malcolm, set the stage for us. I asked you to do this last time when we were facing down Iran, right? You and I were on TV on a regular basis. Coronavirus hadn't hit. We didn't know if Trump was going to start a nuke war with Iran. A lot of things have changed. Some things have stayed the same. But can you lay out for us the overall national security landscape right now that the American people face?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, let me do it State of the Union style.
Yeah.
The national security environment that the United States finds itself in globally right now is poor. I would say grave, but I would only say grave. Of course, the next step is war, right? Mm. But I would only say grave if you were to say factor in your domestic politics. Mm. The rest of the world is poor because we are not a player in the rest of the world the way we had been since, I don't know, we landed on Normandy in 1944. Right? I mean, it's been pretty good since then. But the world is now, how can I put it? It's becoming bipolar in the sense that we, as the United States, since the age of Trump, has been a policy of withdraw the United States from the markets in the world unless it benefits Donald Trump, mollycoddle and support dictators and strongmen who we have just spent, since 1944 knocking down. Literally remove the word democracy and democracy building from the State Department mission. They did that in 2017. So where technically the United States became a pay-to-play country. And that had never been done before. We talked about that last time in the last podcast. The sheikhs of Saudi Arabia would never have thought that they could buy an American president just by showing them their palaces and how many Bentleys they have and putting unlimited money and potential money on the table for them and their children. No one would have thought that and weapons sales to that country would have allowed them to murder an American, resident journalist, just grind him literally into dust and spread his bones in a forest, and that the president of the United States would actually be on your side and act and cover for you, deliberately cover for you, and then brag he covered for you. So that is our allies. I mean, we have removed ourselves from the NATO alliance technically. Donald Trump said, and in 2018, he had a meeting with the the Prime Minister of Sweden, and the Prime Minister of Sweden said, we're not actually a NATO country. We just, coordinate with NATO. And Trump said to him, that's how I want the United States. I mean, it's like you forming angry Americans and saying, okay, well, I don't want to actually have a podcast. I just want to coordinate with these people, and other people, and maybe it'll get broadcast someday. No, you either have it or you don't. We created NATO. We created NATO as a global defense, a defense alliance which spanned the North Atlantic region, brought in Europe, post-war Europe and the United States into a defense pact. Donald Trump, when he met Jens Stoltenberg, the president of NATO, Secretary General of NATO, and he had told him the United States, he thought NATO was an economic forum. And Hans Stoltenberg had to explain to him NATO was a defense alliance.
Right.
I mean, it was incredible. The first meeting, he's having to explain the NATO's mission, NATO's role, why all these weapons were under NATO control, why we were coordinating through the Department of Defense and not the Treasury. I mean, it was crazy. Donald Trump was so utterly ignorant. He did not know that NATO was a defense alliance, and all he was concerned about was getting dues out of NATO, which NATO has no dues. It is not, a country club with golf fees and carts to rent. Okay, the German, the Franco-German, mechanized infantry brigade is not leasable to the Secret Service, right? You just can't rent that. So our alliances have been undermined. And then, of course, there's his insane love of foreign dictators, Egypt, Turkey. You throw the Saudis there, North Korea, and his absolute fascinating love relationship with Vladimir Putin, the second father that he didn't have. So, and you notice as we discuss this, with the exception of Venezuela, it's almost like Venezuela and Mexico building the wall. Latin America doesn't exist in Trump land. Right. I mean, just whoosh, doesn't exist in his world. So what this has done is this has allowed all of our strategic competitors, China, Russia, Belarus, everybody and their dog who wants a piece of the American market that used to exist out there, Brazil, they are now taking our market share away because we have removed diplomacy, we have removed American values, we have removed our whole sense of being from the rest of the world, all right? And to a certain extent, Donald Trump has sort of adopted this pimp's attitude of, hey, yo, where's my money at? But, when he's not out, pimp slapping our allies, he's bragging to the other, alpha pimps around the world. It's amazing that this analogy pops into my head. It's really true. Yeah. He thinks he's sitting around with, bejeweled goblets and wearing giant hats and a cane around with the other OG, dictators. Trump wants to be in that game. And to do that, you have to destroy everything that you love, right? It reminds me of that joking line from the movie Idiocracy of the army officer who was hanging out with the pimps. And he says in his slide presentation, a pimp's love is a special kind of love. Well, that's Donald Trump, right? Where's my money at? Is almost his operating philosophy. And it's insane that I actually have to quote Idiocracy, talk about, management of prostitutes and our NATO and our global alliances around the world in the same sentence, but that's what it's come down to. The United States on a global scale it's bifurcated. We have money in the global market that is flowing, but what's really happening is Donald Trump has sold our lunch to the fat kid next to us at the table. And all the time while the tray is being emptied, he's bragging to the other kids at the table that his tray is full. He has fooled his 30 to 40% of the American population. But everyone else sees a strategic opportunity to take away America's power.
So a lot to unpack there.
Sure.
The pimp thing is going to make some great clips. Like I have this, was Little John on The Apprentice? I don't know, but I feel like he's got to get like a Little John goblet. But it's a good way to break it down because everything is so transactional. But to include his relationship with his generals, right now as we have this conversation, he is at odds with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. After politicizing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, when he dragged him out into the streets during the protests in Washington, D.C., alongside Secretary of Defense Esper. Now he tweets out that he's going to pull all the troops out of Afghanistan by Christmas. Milley says, wait a minute, we don't necessarily want that, nor do we think we can do that. And he says it out loud. Right. So it seems like, Milley is our next great hope to be on the inside to save us all from Trump, right? After Kelly and McMaster's and Mattis and so many others. But Can you talk about the reality of what we face in this moment right now, where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, also who just came out of quarantine, right, or just came, like he and all the Joint Chiefs had to quarantine for 2 weeks or so because they may have been exposed to the coronavirus by the White House, right, at the White House. Can you talk about what this means practically, right? If I'm not a national security expert, I'm watching cable news and I see, yeah, okay, it seems like Trump's kind of always fighting with these guys. He fights with everybody. Why is it different when he's fighting with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
This is a very different thing. And I don't want to use the phrase unprecedented because that word has just been made mundane now by its overusage. What's happening here is a historic moment. General Milley, unlike other senior flag officers who have gotten into it with the president, I mean, this is not anywhere near MacArthur versus Truman, right? MacArthur essentially planning behind the president's back to nuke China in order to stop a land war on the Korean Peninsula, right? And then telling everybody essentially, Commander-in-Chief, what's he, right? This is not a circumstance of where you have an officer disobeying an unlawful order. General Milley's statement to the armed forces 2 days after the Lafayette Square incident was seminal in the sense that it was really the first time that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff laid down a marker to the people of the United States that essentially, if there was an unlawful order given by the commander-in-chief, that the armed forces of the United States wouldn't obey it. And that's what when he gave his speech, that went force-wide, right? It was spread out force-wide that the armed forces of the United States keep the faith with the Constitution of the United States and not any one individual. And as you know, after the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, with Lieutenant Calley, where they mass murdered several hundred civilians, the rule that was hard and fast rule that was entered into the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, is we have an obligation, a sacred obligation now, that now is generations old, that we will not obey an unlawful order. And what determines its lawfulness is the moral clarity that you have to weigh and find in that order. Unlawful order example, go mass murder those civilians. Clear, right? Clear violates the laws of war. Unlawful order. An unlawful order in the age of Trump. Taking out the biscuit, which is the nuclear command codes, getting the football, which is the command communications system that the president has, and saying, I want to nuke Paris because they don't like me. Unlawful order. The guy with the football, all right, is obligated to say, sir, I cannot do that. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is obligated to say, sir, I cannot do that, right? You know how Trump loves those sir stories, right? Where people come up and say, sir. Right. Well, imagine every member of the chain of command, right down to the nuclear launch officers, who will look at each other and go, Paris, I'm not turning that key, right? And of course, to get to that point, you would have to fire every person down to the nuclear launch officer and find a sycophant willing to carry out an unlawful order. General Milley was making it clear to the president, whether he got it or not, but he certainly made it clear to everyone else. We are beholden to the Constitution, and the Constitution is more than just a set of rules. It's also a set of values, and those values which the armed forces is comprised of. And I write about this in my last book, The Plot to Betray America, where I do a study of character and what we in the armed forces believe is our core principles. In the Navy, honor, courage, commitment. In the Air Force, excellence in all we do. In the Army, duty, honor, country. Marine Corps, always faithful. Coast Guard, always ready. you know, Space Force, beam me up. So, but okay, all joking aside,
Yeah.
it was Colonel Chamberlain of the 20th Maine who saved the Battle of Gettysburg at Little Round Top, who in his speech years later talked about the moral fiber that creates and weaves the character that is bound in the soul of a man, the character. And Donald Trump meets none of the minor, even the slimmest qualifications in terms of character. He relies on the dictator's rule of obedience to orders. And that's why Donald Trump has now come smack into the core values of the armed forces. Milley wasn't just saying, hey, you know, the National Guard falls under our control. He ordered back every force that was under his control. The 82nd Airborne's Ready Force that they bought to Washington, D.C., the Ready Brigade, they ordered them back. The 10th Mountain Division Military Police ordered them back, ordered all the ammunition that the National Guard units had brought with them, ordered them returned, and then essentially, you know, didn't obey any further orders on troop deployments. 3 times the Joint Chiefs were asked to bring more troops, and 3 times, you know, they had to go out to the PX and get a haircut.
Right. So thank you for the history lesson. That's part of why I think it's important to bring you on this show, to go all the way back to the Civil War and beyond and put it in current context. I've been outspoken about Milley. I think he should have resigned. At the point in that declaration to the force, he also apologized for allowing himself to be politicized in this typically noble way, where he apologized for allowing himself to be politicized without focusing attention on the fact that Trump politicized him, right? So there's always kind of a pulling of the punches that's been happening. But maybe there's a calculation now, Malcolm, with General Milley, and now it seems more and more like with Secretary Esper too, who said today he has no plans to deploy military forces to polling sites. It seems like maybe they've done a calculation and said, you know, Trump can't fire me in the last 30 days.
Right.
I'm going to be here until the election. I'm going to hold as many of the lines and bolster as much of our integrity and protect the force as much as I can. I mean, that seems like a calculation. But let's take this a step further, because part of what I want to do in this conversation, Malcolm, is not just analyze the news item that happened today, where, for example, Trump tweeted a conspiracy theory saying that Obama and Biden killed SEAL Team 6, right? That's the flashpoint of the day. I don't want to get distracted by that. I actually want to ask you and have a conversation with you about projecting to the future. Because those of us who are military strategists, those of us who are political strategists, are thinking about the future, not just for our businesses or for our country, but for our families. Sure. And many of us, I think, see what could be a very potentially flammable, violent time around the election and in the weeks afterward, maybe all the way through to January, various levels. It could just be, you know, riots, or it could be the Proud Boys versus the Wisconsin National Guard, right? This could escalate to a level we've never seen since the Civil War. And a lot of folks are looking to the military to be our savior. A lot of folks are scared to death of the military because they don't know if it's our military or Trump's military. And that's maybe the most damaging part of what he's done. But can I ask you to project? Last time you were on the show, I asked you, what would war with Iran look like? And you laid it out with a great degree of specificity. I'm going to ask you now, what do you think the election month will look like? And the months that follow, based off the best knowledge we have right now, how do you see this militarily unfolding, domestically, obviously, and potentially internationally as well?
You know, let me reach back to something. I like to choose popular fiction from time to time to give some illustrations. If any of you hadn't seen it, there are 2 TV shows, and I might have mentioned it in the last show, that I think are sort of can give us indications of what could happen. There was a show, an apocryphal show, I really liked it, was called Last Resort. And it was about a U.S. ballistic missile submarine with a black commander and black submarine commander and they were given orders using the wrong communications network to nuke Karachi, Pakistan. And they were like, what? Wait, what? And the orders were coming from a secondary communications network that means that Washington, D.C. and all other command structures have been destroyed through atomic bombs. So instead of executing that order, they go up a little high and they start watching satellite TV, and they start watching, Hannah Montana out of the Washington, D.C. area, which means they're now going to question those orders. Because when you give orders to become a genocidaire, you might want to make sure, before you nuke 5 million people, you might want to make sure that, Washington, D.C. doesn't exist. So, interesting component of this story is that the officer in charge of this submarine is trying to make this moral decision. And at one point, they shift back to Washington, D.C., to the office of a defense lobbyist. And on the television screen, this is the part that's most interesting. You see almost in the background, you hear the announcer on CNN or MSNBC going, the Joint Chiefs voted that they have no confidence in the President of the United States, and Congress is preparing for his imminent removal. And then you suddenly understand the context of a warning order to nuke Karachi, Pakistan. The president in this show has lost confidence of the armed forces. And then they receive a call, this submarine, not from the Secretary of Defense, not from the National Security Advisor, but an Assistant Deputy Secretary of Defense who says, I'm relieving you of your command, go nuke Karachi, Pakistan.
Right.
That's the kind of crisis that could happen where Donald Trump decides to do something broad stroke. Look, the last time we talked about war with Iran, it turns out Donald Trump was quite the coward. He really didn't want war with Iran. He wanted to appear that he could have war with Iran. Mm-hmm. And so he backed away from it because he's afraid of things that are out of his, made for TV control. But this, where Donald Trump is backed with his back to the wall, losing the confidence of the country. It was his biographer the other day who said, this is where he will lash out, because his philosophy is, if I go down, everyone goes down with me. Right. I don't believe that will happen, but I do believe we could be in a circumstance where next week we wake up and suddenly all of the chairs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are resigning along with General Milley. And you know what will happen? I mean, the first thing you have to do is you have to extrapolate. What happened? Well, the only thing that could have happened was that Donald Trump gave a crazy order while we were sleeping, and they were like, hell no, I'm not doing it. My deputies aren't doing it. The force chiefs aren't doing it. And you can work your way down to the guy who's at the latrine at Fort Bragg, right? He's not going to do it either. And that's a possibility, because there are crazy things going on right now. Bill Barr started dropping hints last week that Hunter Biden and Joe Biden were on his radar. And then Trump started dropping hints that he wanted Barack Obama essentially arrested and indicted. Rudy Giuliani today put out a whole bunch of emails taken from the Ukraine saying Hunter Biden should be arrested to a certain extent. He needs an October surprise, in October. Well, we only got 2 weeks left in October. So imagine him saying, I'm going to order the arrest of Barack Obama or Joe Biden. Now, they have Secret Service protection. Those officers are sworn for life. Whose orders do they follow? Do they follow the protectee code or the director of the Secret Service? Are you going to have a gun battle between his security force, his personal protective officer, or some local cops that throw a perimeter around Friendship Heights between Capitol Hill Police and Washington, D.C. SWAT? This is so crazy that we're talking about it. That means it's now within the realm of possibility.
Right.
I don't hold any truck for crazy. The other scenario is
so television show number one is The Last Resort. You mentioned Hannah Montana, but that's not the second show you want to talk about.
No,
there's another one, because
even worse.
I think it's important. When I was in Iraq, someone once said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not trying to kill you.
That's correct.
Just because we cover these scenarios, or they're crazy, doesn't mean they're possible. This is a man who stood before the UN and threatened to wipe out North Korea. Right? He has made these statements before. It's not unreasonable that he could make a proclamation, but he also, and maybe this is where I'm going to ask you what the second show is. He could also just say, I'm on my way out. I'm going to go. All my supporters go down fighting. Right? And maybe a small number of them will do that, but there are a small number that will do that. So we could see skirmishes, right? You could see these quote unquote militias that I think are terrorist groups. I'm sure you have thoughts on that, right? Little terrorist groups, domestic terrorist groups, the Proud Boys, others, trying to create essentially terrorist activities that have to be put down by the FBI, like, for example, kidnapping the governor of Michigan, right? These are real world scenarios that are unfolding. So I just want to underscore that this is real. It is possible. And that our national defense apparatus is not only planning for it, they're addressing it. We don't even know what they're facing right now, but in real time, the CIA, the FBI, all of our national security apparatus is monitoring and putting down these types of things while we record this conversation.
Right. I will say this, and I say this as an intelligence professional, and I would never, prior to 2016, ever have thought any of the things I said out of my mouth over the last 4 years, every bit of which has turned out to be true, which I predicted in some circumstances years in advance and wrote 3 books about. I would never have imagined any of them being true, because for them to be true, you would have to be in this crazy Tom Clancy world where the fabric of the United States was not just, not rendered, but literally taken with scissors and cut into pieces. And as I like to say, where like Trump has removed the star, the blue field and the red stripes, and has just made an all-white flag, because that's his version of tribalism, which, by the way, is the flag of surrender. But just to even talk about these things was crazy. Now, I don't have to discuss them. I don't have to prognosticate them. I'm now, Monday morning quarterbacking what has actually happened. And so when we do an intelligence analysis or a projection, that's one thing. But everything that I've said, what in this last few minutes of what could happen over the next 2 weeks, I have high confidence. High confidence is 90% up that these things could occur and that they could literally rip this country apart in the next 14 days. We have seen the things that have really hit us come out of nowhere. Virtually no transmitting the punch. And Trump, I think, because there's no process in his head. It's all gut, spur of the moment. What can I do to amplify things and terrify people and upgun my supporters? The next scenario that you asked about.
This is the second television show, right?
Yeah, the show.
And it wasn't not Hannah Montana.
No, the show in the
which
2000s.
I had no idea you were a big fan of, but
well, that's how you checked whether you were nuked or not, right? You can see Hannah Montana.
Because Hannah Montana, like roaches, will survive everything.
Everything.
Right? Okay.
So the other show was a TV show from the mid-2000s called Jericho. Jericho is terrifying. Even now, when I think about the TV show Jericho, I get a little nervous-y and goosebumpy. I said that Jericho is not a TV show. Jericho is a template for someone to destroy the United States. And it's an unlikely scenario, you might think, where these ultra-extremist, disparate right-wing groups get together with a director of Homeland Security and, using a government contractor that's like Halliburton, take 23 atomic bombs that were supposed to be dismantled from the Belarusian arsenal and detonate them east of the Mississippi to eliminate liberal America. And that's not the real scary part of the show. The scary part of the show is the entirety of 2 seasons of television comes down to how a tiny little village survives without any governmental infrastructure support until the 10th Mountain Division arrives, to stop range wars between one village and the next. And the most dangerous thing you could do in the TV show Jericho is leave the perimeter of your village on a road. And I just thought, when I was watching it, I realized that does not require a nuclear bomb to go off to do. That requires civil unrest at a level where people could turn their little towns into armed fiefdoms, and that the state, county, and national forces can't handle an uprising. So the place that I live in upstate New York is about 20 miles west of South Egremont, Massachusetts. And that is where the final battle of the Shays Rebellion was fought. And if you recall the Shays Rebellion, it was a tax rebellion, Massachusetts, late 1790s. And they just decided they were going to have another American Revolution. George Washington ordered the governor of Massachusetts to bring out the state militia, and he had a special code, a special addendum to his frag order, to his force order. Bring cannons. Okay, so in South Egremont, these yahoos with rifles went at it with the state militia, and it quickly ended when they started shooting cannonballs through them, killing, of course, the guy who started the rebellion. This is how it might have to end up for some people who think they have enough AR-15s and ammunition, and they and their big fat, Meal Team 6, fat boys are going to go out and seize control of the government for Donald Trump. That could also manifest itself overnight.
Yeah, this is the conversation I want to have, because it's the one that you're not seeing on cable news.
No.
It's the one that we're having with our fellow national security, military veterans friends online, on the phone. We're talking about different scenarios, and we're scenario planning like we've been trained to do, right?
Right.
And now we're looking at the landscape where we see these, terrorist groups, militias, whatever we want to call them, doing checkpoints, right? Like actually executing checkpoints. They are unmarked. They have weapons. It's exactly what we saw. It's exactly what we saw in Fallujah, exactly what we saw in Baghdad. They're asking for your papers. Who are you? Where you're going? They have no authority. Right. It's not, I've explained to people before that what was in large part a civil war in Iraq was not the blue and the gray. It was a shark tank. So we have this potential shark tank unfolding that could be, let's call it best case scenario. There are some minor yahoos. I think our friend Naveed was on MSNBC and called them. He said they're not Al-Qaeda, the Yal-Qaeda, right? Yeah. There may be these.
I call them vanilla ISIS.
There you go, vanilla ISIS, right? So some of these groups come out and cause some degree of destruction, chaos, violence, terrorist attacks. Our national security apparatus has to respond. We could have a prolonged, extended period of months. And let's assume Joe Biden wins and Trump refuses to accept the results. And we have, ironically, a similar situation where Biden now has to be walled in the White House to protect him. And we have the forces kind of flipping the other way and a prolonged period of instability. So all that happens potentially, right, while our enemies are licking their chops. So I said it before, our enemies are celebrating. Putin loves this. Kim Jong-un loves this. Al-Qaeda couldn't have dreamed up a better scenario than the coronavirus taking out hundreds of thousands of people and crippling our economy and tying up our military. But go back to what happens then, right? So let's assume Trump is out, he's taken out, Biden comes in. I mean, are we looking at a new normal where America feels like Israel for years, where there's a constant threat of some kind of violence? Or does it feel like the Middle East, or do you feel like this runs its course? And if so, how long does that take?
I've trained a lot of people in Homeland Security divisions or state Homeland Security departments over the last 20 years. I started with Georgia Department of Homeland Security in 2002, where, I had to bring counterterrorism and intelligence principles down to the street level SWAT cop, right? But there's some things that they taught me too. I mean, I went through SWAT officer school while I was in the military with Capitol Hill Police, and that was all Los Angeles police SWAT guys. There's one thing that I learned about them. They like a fight. Okay, so I mean it. Police forces are jealous organizations. Set aside the few bad apples that have caused these horrific murders of African American men. The average policeman wants to go home, and they do want law and order. But when you give them an extraordinary threat, they relish that fight. Okay, I mean, I trained New York State Department of Homeland Security, and I was going over with them how the ISIS members inside of Paris during the Bataclan massacre had established secondary and tertiary safe houses. And in one scenario, the safe house in Saint Denis, which I later went to, that it was the snipers that initiated the gun battle. And I said, I want you to listen to this cut of audio. And I played them this shooting, and it's like full automatic. I go, that's the snipers. The scenario got so bad. They saw the SWAT team had a hand grenade thrown into the hallway, which killed their dog and incapacitated the assault team. The snipers were shooting full automatic on the terrorists. That's a bad scenario. And these cops are all like, it could get that bad? And I'm like, yeah, but the people you might have to deal with have semi-automatic long rifles, and there won't be 3 of them. There might be 50 of them. In this scenario, and this is why I mentioned the TV show Jericho, in Oregon last month during the wildfires, a rumor had gotten out that Antifa provocateurs were coming to this tiny little village in Oregon, and armed men took it upon themselves to set up those checkpoints you were talking about until the state police intervened, told them, you better disappear, we're going to disarm you. All based on a rumor, and 2 journalists who had come up there who had out-of-state plates. And these people were being told on their social media, Antifa was setting these fires. And they were ready to kill over that. They were ready to establish their own little fiefdom over that. That's what happened in the TV show Jericho, to the point where you would roll up on a village and they would identify you friend or foe and then kill you based on whatever scenario is happening in their head. And just imagine if that were to happen on the election night and some people refuse to accept the results and they go, well, we're Trump country now. Or we're by whatever scenario you want to use it as a winner. I don't see that happening with liberals because, we don't go around brandishing our guns in ISIS-like convoys with giant flags running around like we just took the city of Mosul. That's vanilla ISIS. They're really good at that. But imagine these guys saying, okay, Donald Trump says we won. We won, and they're going to steal the election from us. Now it's time for us to start going and taking back state houses. Time for us to go take police stations. Time for us to go out and do armed demonstrations on the streets, right? I tell my neighbors this all the time. I'm a competitive shooter. And they go, oh, Malcolm, I heard you're a gun guy. I go, yeah, for someone who is out of control in my village who comes onto my property. I'm not with you. I'm not a militiaman, right? And these people have these fantasies in their head that they are essentially the Wolverines. They're the guys who are fighting the invader forces. They believe the propaganda they're being told.
Right.
And I am definitely afraid on election night, we may get into the second episode of Jericho where law enforcement gets killed by, somebody with guns. And now all that's left is these guys are establishing roadblocks on the bridge at the front and back of their town and not recognizing the authority of the United States the next day.
So we've gone on a hell of a journey from Paris to Hannah, Montana, to the Wolverines reference from Red Dawn, which is,
my God, we're so screwed that we're talking about this.
The remake was shit, but my generation of soldiers and service members, in part, were raised thinking we were going to be like Jed and Wolverines, right? In Red Dawn. But now it comes full circle. Some people in this country right now, Malcolm, are in denial, right? Many people are in denial. They don't want to understand the severity of what's happening or the depth of the national security threats that we face, both domestic and abroad. You're on TV all the time. You're the kind of scare the shit out of people guy on MSNBC. I sometimes play that role too. But at the end of the day, for people who are listening to this conversation and it either validates what they've been concerned about or it's scaring the living shit out of them, what do you want to leave them with? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you realistic? What is your message to the person who doesn't care about party, who cares about their country, who's reasonable and wants, our country to get through this really hard time and come out on the other side better? What's your message to them right now?
Okay. And, I hope they're listening to me, because now I want to say something that I think is very important. I was born in Philadelphia at the Naval Hospital in Philadelphia. I was raised in that city. I was steeped in the words of the founding fathers. I believe in everything that they wrote, they debated about, they argued about, the values that they espoused, even though some of them were flaming hypocrites. Thomas Jefferson was sleeping with his late wife's half-sister, who was a slave, right? I mean, so these things, though, mean something to me. What was written, what the values we have held for 245 years means something to all of us. And if you call yourself a patriot, if you call yourself American, the next 3 weeks is the one time you must pay attention to what's going on in the world around you. We literally could be at the end of the American experiment. Yes, we could have an election, but if we find people refuse to go by the results on either side, if armed people decide they're not going to accept the results of the election, or if we elect a third, this third-rate dictator. And I'm saying that about Donald Trump. I'm saying that as an intelligence professional who has seen third world dictators, tin pot potentates left and right. This man is an authoritarian. He believes in what I call constitutional autocracy, the trappings of the Constitution, with all the autocracy and dictatorship of Vladimir Putin's Russia. We have lost our values. Those values we may not get back if this election goes into his hands, either through force or because you were too lazy to get up on election day or the 20 days in advance of the election. Many states are voting now. My state votes in 10 days. There's almost 2 weeks of voting time before the election. This is your chance to be in a historic moment in American history. Because if you're not, you're going to have a historic moment in American history, whether you like it or not. And whether it's American history for the next 20 years or Trumpian history, you need to make that choice. If you call yourself a patriot and you say that you find that man's character is your values, especially if you're a veteran, you need to go check your oath, because the oath is to the Constitution. It is not to somebody who is now the most documented liar in American history. This man makes the characters in Huck Finn look like pikers, right? What were the two con artists in Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer? The King and the Duke, right? These two hucksters who went from village to village swearing. One was, the former Dauphin of France, and the other is the Duke of York, and he would bilk money out of them. That's where they are. The problem is the flag behind you is what's at risk. Will you risk your nation over that? Is your one day where you don't care worth losing everything that's ever been before us? You need to make that decision now. And what do they say? You better choose, but you better choose wisely.
That is a little segment that people are going to hit rewind on, and I hope it wakes them up. I hope it shakes them to action. We say it all the time: if you're not angry, you're not paying attention, and you must stay vigilant. I think that, Malcolm, you just kind of encapsulated everything we've tried to cover in 81 episodes of this show and all the other work we've been doing in between. It is gut check time, but I also hope that this show has prepared people for the fact that election day is not the end of the fourth quarter. It might be the end of the third quarter, and we might have another quarter after that, and maybe 1, 2, 3 overtimes. So part of what I think we owe this country as people who have experience on politics and national defense and these strategic issues is whatever voice we have, reminding people this is going to be a long fight. This is a fight for the soul of the nation, and like any fight, it's going to be long, it's going to be costly, it's going to be hard. Your leaders have to level with you, but there are leaders that will rise to the moment. Malcolm, you are one of those leaders that's rising to the moment. You are a conscience. I think I said you were the most interesting person in America last time I interviewed. You just keep getting more interesting. You know, to go from Huck Finn to Red Dawn to Hannah Montana to Chamberlain, you take us on a fascinating journey and you educate us along the way. I do have to give you something. We gave you Peeps last time. I gave you the T-shirt that you love that people can get at angryamericans.us. I'm sending you a bottle of Uncle Nearest whiskey. We didn't have that last time you were on the show, but you're getting Uncle Nearest.
Wait, isn't that the black bourbon?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the recipe of the old guy that created Jack Daniels. He was the black distiller.
Nearest Green.
I have been dying to get that stuff.
The legend grows. Jeffrey Wright on our show introduced it to us. They've been big supporters of this show. I'm going to get you a bottle of that. I'm telling folks, I'm still participating in Sober October. I picked the hardest October on the planet to stay off the sauce, but I have done it since the beginning of September. I'm going to stick it out through November, and I think it'll help me stick it out for the next couple of months, but you're getting a bottle of that. One final question. This is the bonus question for returning guests to end on a moment of levity. It's a really tough one. There's no third-party option. You must choose. Malcolm Nance, pancakes or waffles?
My God. Pancakes. And would you like to know why?
Of course.
I'm going to tell you something happy. All right. 2 nights ago, you know, they say when you lose a spouse, there's 2 types of dreams. You have regular dreams, and then you have these dreams called visitation dreams. I never believed this bunkum until I had one. And 2 nights ago, I had what's called a visitation dream. And my wife came to me, told me she loved me, and gave me a big kiss. And then we had pancakes. So I'm team pancake from here on out, boy.
That is a great answer. And the spirit is strong within you. Your wife's spirit is strong within you, and all that you and your wife and your family and your entire team have been doing over this last couple of years, especially, is so critical. I think we're all team pancakes right now.
Yeah.
But I am so grateful for your leadership, man. I thank you for coming back on Angry Americans. I hope you'll come back again. Happy Navy birthday to you. Yeah. And we're gonna continue to monitor this situation. But you're a great American, man. I'm honored to have you as a friend. I hope wherever you are in that skiff, you're staying frosty and you're staying vigilant.
I am too. I hope you do too. And I love this show. Keep up the T-shirts, man. They're awesome.
This show loves you back. Ladies and gentlemen, potentially the future governor of the state of New York, the great and powerful Malcolm Nance, live from his underground bunker, which will only fit a couple of you. So take it in your own hands and let's all fight for our country so that Malcolm Nance can get elected governor of New York. That's it from here. Thank you, Malcolm.
You're welcome.
Stay frosty.